Awesome, awesome. Now I'm going to just pick up on some questions. I don't know whether you can see in the chat box. There are a couple of questions. One goes back to conceptual or definitional issue. What's the difference between robotic process automation and AI? And then the other one speaks to your frequent mention of data. How to align your AI strategy with your data management strategy. I imagine that to be probably quite crucial.
Yes.
And someone asked around security and compliance policies, and what about Facebook? Got fined for its abuses. So how does one have to think around that? And a question on POPI legislation. You probably answered a lot around how you've got to ensure POPI compliance, get the right kind of consent from your customer to tell them what you're doing with the data, but maybe you have some additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So did I get that right? The first question is the difference between RPA and AI.
Yeah.
Great question, and I have actually been planning to do a slide on this. So strictly speaking, and RPA companies increasingly are using AI, but strictly speaking, RPA, process automation, is defined as doing fairly simple tasks. So you would basically have a task, something like, in a mechanical sense, would be something like having a conveyor belt, and objects are coming along on this conveyor belt, and you make a robot that takes the object from the conveyor belt and puts it in a box. And it would be, throughout the business, you could think of lots of simple tasks. So a customer fills in a form, and instead of having someone typing information from that form into a database, you have a little script that pulls the information from a digital form and pushes it into a database. So there's no decision-making or logic. Well, there might be logic, but there's no sort of complex decision-making that the system needs to learn. AI can similarly do fairly simple tasks, and do complex tasks as well, but there are a few things that set it apart. So one would be, in our conveyor belt example, if you have a camera looking at those objects coming along a conveyor belt and spotting whether or not they are of the right quality and whether or not there's a defect, and then learning over time, perhaps from feedback. If it identifies something as being good quality and someone down the line finds a defect, it gets that feedback and it improves from that. That is not process automation. That is AI. That is a learning system, which is learning from data, learning from experience. So that's one way to define them, or to differentiate them. The other way is that normal process automation cannot deal with unstructured data. So unstructured data would be, structured data would of course be something like Excel, where you've got lots of columns, and every column hopefully has the same type of information in it, and it's very easy to manipulate and to turn into a pivot table and so forth. Unstructured data would be free-form text, speech, images, videos, and AI doesn't just work with unstructured, but process automation cannot work with unstructured data. And more and more you'll see that process automation people and companies start mentioning things like natural language processing and start mentioning other AI techniques, because obviously combining these two disciplines is quite powerful. And in AI, we'll quite often use some sort of process automation type of techniques to get things flowing smoothly into and out of the AI system. Then I think we had a question on data and AI, and this is a super important topic. I cannot stress this enough. Your data is much worse than you think it is. You probably have tons of it, but it's not as useful for AI as you expect. But the only way to fix that is to actually start doing AI. And what will happen is you go through a lot of feature engineering. So 75% of an AI project, sometimes more, is working on the data, enriching the data, building new features from the data that make it easy for the machine to learn. And then you realize all kinds of things are missing, and iterating through that and having the machine learning team build something and show it to the business experts, and then they can say, oh, but you seem to be missing this nuance. You're struggling on this type of case, a specific type of customer which you're not accounting for correctly. The AI team can then look at data and see, oh, okay, we understand, but you don't have the data that we need to make this decision correctly. And then you adjust your data process and you start capturing that information. So that iteration, and starting iteration as early as possible, gets you ahead of AI. Just collecting data at random can be quite quite dangerous and quite slow and painful and lead to a lot of rework. And then, yeah, so a lot of questions on compliance. And maybe this is something where we need to work together with a Poppy expert to actually draw up a bit of material on this. But the key thing here, I think a good rule of thumb is if you're doing something new that your business has not done before, so if you're making some sort of inference or decision based on clients' data and you are not doing that already, that's definitely a red flag. You need to make sure that you have permission to do that thing. And also, a good test is describe what you're going to do, and then ask if that goes into the news. Are you going to be happy with it? And that's not a compliance or a legal test, but that's also always a good way to check this and to see whether or not it's something that's likely to get you into trouble. And then before putting something into production, check it out with the legal team. It's there are going to be a lot of cases where it's not necessary, but especially in a compliance-heavy space like banking, it is worthwhile to check that what you're planning to do is in fact allowed, or perhaps you just need to ask for additional permission. And I've seen some of the medical aid companies who are now doing some cool stuff with data, sharing data with your physician, but that requires special additional permission. But it can be as simple as informing the client, look, this is what we're aiming to do. This is the benefit. Are you happy? Do you give us permission to use the data for this? So you still need to go through the processes, through the compliance checks, but it's going to be a lot easier when you're using AI to do something that you're already doing versus something new.
Very good, very good. Thank you for that. I see from the number of participants, you're holding their attention. It's barely dropped, although we're 7 minutes over. I just want to open the. So I kind of repeated some of the questions that were put into the chat box, but maybe there are some people in the audience who want to ask a question directly.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Are there any more questions? Because I feel like this is it's a little bit like you're going to a restaurant and you just had the starter menu. This conversation is starter. We haven't really gotten to the meat.
This is the tasting menu tie. We're just giving a small sample of each of the different areas and different topics.
I could have another 20 or 30 conversations and hours with you and learn more and new stuff. Oh, here. From Jade van der Westhuizen to everyone, would you recommend learning Python?
It's fantastic. So I love using Python. I was using Python when I was not supposed to be using Python. I was using Python on my free time. Eventually, so I particularly do not like VBA. For those Excel gurus out there, I find VBA to not be a particularly efficient, friendly, or useful language. And Python actually has functions to manipulate Excel. So that's one of the things that really got me going with it. It is a fantastic language for data science, for building any type of application. I guess it's not that good for the best thing for building cell phone apps. Although when I build a cell phone app, I still use Python for my servers and backends. And it is incredibly good at manipulating data in a very efficient, very fast way. And most importantly, I think it has an incredible data science and machine learning and AI community that's constantly making new tools to make your life easier and to make your coding and your creation of projects faster. So in academia, they use a lot of R, but anyone starting out, I would say, yeah, Python is great. If you enjoy programming, I mean, it's something that some people connect with and they enjoy that way of thinking. It is by no means necessary, but you can't go wrong by learning a little bit of Python and going through a course or two on how to build simple machine learning projects. It gives you a nice intuition for how to work with the data, and also just opens your eyes up to some of the stuff you can do.
Can someone who's never done any programming, can they learn Python off the bat? I mean, is that something you can do without any prior knowledge? And if so, how long would it take? How long does it take to become relatively proficient?
If you've never done any programming before, definitely a bit longer. I think having done some things like doing a lot of formulas in Excel, if you're an Excel whiz, a lot of the same thinking will translate to programming as well. So that'll help. If you're not that proficient with Excel, you haven't done any programming before, then you need to start out more from the basics. And I think, doing it part-time, it obviously takes a bit longer, but over the course of a year, spending some time on it, you will get to the point where you can start doing some data manipulation, where you can start where you can definitely do courses that teach you some data science techniques. I mean, if you're really dedicated, then I think 6 months is a reasonable time frame to be doing simple data science and machine learning things in Python, but that's going to be a stretch. And I think these timelines vary a lot for different people as well. Some people, their strengths are in areas that I'm absolutely no good with, such as design, or there's a lot of areas. But if you have that connection, you can very easily pick up logic and pick up how things like Excel. I think Excel is a very good test bed if you work with SQL, for instance. If you're comfortable with that type of thing, it will go faster. But I think a key thing is just pushing through the first part, because it becomes more fun, it becomes more interesting as you learn more. But it can seem a little bit daunting initially. But I think these days the online learning tools have become really good. I wouldn't be surprised if within a few months people are able to write scripts in Python, but even start doing simple machine learning tasks. But really, there's a lot to learn. I think doing an actual full-on real-life project, the skill level required there becomes a lot deeper, because your ability to manipulate data efficiently becomes much more important. And they don't necessarily teach you that in the courses to the extent that they should. But that's it. You can get a machine learning engineer or a programmer to do a lot of that. So there's not a key skill. But I do encourage you, anyone who's interested, get your hands dirty on some Python. It's a cool language, and you can probably use it to automate simple things that are in and around the office for yourself. There's actually a book called something like Automate the Boring Things, or something along those lines, which is an entire Python book just dedicated to automating away repetitive tasks in your life that you don't want to do over and over.
Right. I think we need to find that reference. Well, I certainly need to find that reference. Very important. But I mean, the upshot of what you're saying, it's a massive field, but the barriers to entry are low. Most people can do it with a little bit of aptitude. I don't know whether you heard, but the schools have been closed now, so I might start sending kids. We can consider sending our kids to Python coding.
Absolutely, and high school is a fantastic time to learn. I mean, I learned Java back in high school, and that's given me a fantastic base for every other programming language that I've had to pick up, and it just makes it so much easier. So I recommend it for students, absolutely.
So now there are two more questions here, and they're quite technical. One is, what are your thoughts on AI in relation to cloud technology? And then the other one is, Power Apps and Power Automate and PBI reports are also good tools that beginners can tap into and learn, even if they're not developers.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. So let me start with the second one. There are fantastic automation tools out there, and I think experience with these tools, and also they're like data pipeline tools like Alteryx, etc., out there as well. And some of them allow you to actually insert some Python code if you wanted to do something more complex. But the key thing about them is they allow you to do automation tasks, to do data manipulation tasks without needing the code. But then you can see what is possible, and you can see, oh, we're able to do all these different things. This gives me an idea for similar things that we could do. And perhaps maybe you can't do them within that platform, but being aware of what these type of tools can do helps you think in the right direction. So yeah, I definitely encourage people to get involved, to use these tools as much as they're available. It's a really great way to start that programmatic thinking as well. All the major cloud providers also have their own AI toolsets. So occasionally you can have bits and pieces of different AI systems that you can pull together to make something fairly complex. Amazon has some great AI tools on their AWS platform for, say, image recognition. A lot of the providers have these AI tools. And of course, the other way AI cloud fits in is scaling AI platforms and providing somewhere to train AI platforms, because quite often you need quite a bit of computing power to train different models, and you can quite easily scale up. I will warn that it is often more expensive to run your AI architecture, especially during the experimentational phase, in the cloud than it is to just buy a few heavy-duty desktops for your AI engineering team. And it's definitely going to be much faster for them to sandbox and to experiment and to develop initial prototypes if you've got their own environments with some fairly heavy-duty computers. And those aren't necessarily very expensive. But running a heavy AI architecture in the cloud is more expensive than you would expect. But that said, the cloud providers do have very good setups and very good scalability and very good servers that you can rent from them for this application. But it's good to be aware of both. And I think if you get early in your AI journey, it's not necessarily useful to use the cloud infrastructure unless you absolutely have to use it for your business purposes. Most likely, when you get to production, you'll need to integrate into cloud if you're using cloud infrastructure for your business. When it gets to using their AI tools, that's good to experiment with. It's actually, for prototyping, it's quite cool sometimes to use the cloud providers' AI tools. You might have to build your own one to more specifically cater to your circumstances and to get the accuracy up. But if you can do a quick and dirty prototype by plugging in a cloud provider's AI tool to demonstrate how a certain problem could be solved, there's some value in that as well.
I'd like to thank you really for taking us through all many of the dimensions of AI. I think you've answered a huge number of questions that many of us had at the beginning of this session. So thank you very much. It's really been a privilege and honor to have you enlighten us on this vast topic. And really, this is a request or an invitation to the audience. If you out there want to know more, or want us to maybe start putting a course together, a short course, a one-day course, or something more formal, do reach out, do let us know, and we'll see, how we can start building something that looks at, project-based learning and learning on the fly and getting our heads around AI. So once again, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you guys for signing in and registering, and for your attention and interest.
I'll dig it up for us. Yeah, thanks everyone. It was great to have the opportunity to talk to you all, and yeah, I welcome everyone to reach out if you're interested in continuing the conversation or looking at how to get AI started in your business or department as well.